to allow parents to have a sense of skills that would not just be based on guidelines that sometimes, unfortunately, are only policy-based or might be informed by foreign ideologies, but to look to the elders, to the grandmothers, to opinions that we have. And so, Honorable Speaker, I thank the Chair. I appreciate the effort. I am in particular happy that the Ministry is recognizing, especially the Ministry of Labor, that they would like to enhance positive parental skills, and they would like to nurture and protect children from exposure to sexual abuse. I'd like to urge the Ministry that there is a breakdown of values, and that some of these teenagers, Honorable Speaker, are getting impregnated right within the family by their relatives, something that is not being discussed because it is seen to be taboo, but which really is a reflection of the way that our society has completely broken down from the social values. Allow me, Honourable Speaker, as I sit down as a member of the very respectable county of Siaya, a county where, Honourable Speaker, there is a joke that if you throw a stone, it will land on the head of a professor or a researcher. I have listened with concern, and I want to say that I express great regret that we would have a situation where a report would be tabled that does not seem to observe or follow the research parameters. I, however, want to submit, Honourable Speaker, that I am always a student, and getting to sit in this honourable house sometimes might make you get a little change of view with regards to how research can be interpreted, of what it is that would be seen to be the responsible or the actual relevant parameters for research. And so I just want to indeed express deep regret, as other members have, with the manner in which this Infrotech came up with the research, and appreciate, Honourable Speaker, the guidance that you gave. However, I hope that we can remember, as I have learned sitting in this House, Honourable Speaker, that the kind of research that sometimes takes place in the academia and in those other areas might not necessarily be relevant or appropriate for a political context such as this one. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I want to appreciate the response.
Next statement by the Chair, Departmental Committee on Education and Research. The Chair of Education and Research. She was supposed to to issue a statement in response to a request by the Honorable Mwadime Andrew. Well, I see both of them are absent, not desiring to be present, I believe. So they can go and meet wherever they are, and then do some little bit of research, I suppose. Yeah, but the Honorable Omboko is not in possession of the statement. But the Honorable Omboko Milemba said he was somewhere in some church, somewhere in the village. So that might be very good there. Now, about this statement, he may not be aware. And now, if we tell him to respond, you might reduce his rating. Yes. Let's go to the next order.
Order number 8, motion. Report on the status of implementation of legislation, petitions, and resolutions.
Honorable Olekenta.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that the House adopt the report of the Committee on Implementation on the status of implementation of the legislations, petitions, and resolutions passed by the House laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, June 30th, 2020. Honorable Speaker, this is in line with the committee's mandate pursuant to Standing Order 292. Honorable Speaker, this is an omnibus report covering various House resolutions. It is the second one the committee has tabled, having tabled a similar one in 2018. Unfortunately, the same has not been brought for debate, and I request the Business House Committee to expedite the resumption of that report or to the reintroduction. Honorable Speaker, the report covers the following 6 motions, 6 committee reports, and 19 reports on petitions. And for the record, and for the benefit and information of the concerned members, I'd like to say the motions, the 6 motions are as follows. 1, resolution that the national government formulates and implements a policy on the criteria for recruitment and remuneration of village elders. The motion was proposed by Honorable George Murugara MP and was passed by the House on 3rd April 2019. 2, resolution that all disciplined forces should give first priority to National Youth Service graduates during recruitment. The motion was proposed by Honorable Michael Moshera MP and was passed by the House on 18th April 2018. 3, resolution on the review of terms and conditions for recruitment, remuneration, and deployment of National Service reservists in arid and semi-arid areas. The motion was proposed by Honorable Olays Lentoimaga MP and was passed by the House on 26 September 2019. 4, the resolution that the government exercises its power to protect Kenya from harassment by external threats. And on the Molemwad issue, that was brought by Honorable Seuri, on the status of implementation, the Ministry of Lands and Physical Planning waived payment of all statutory fees for processing and issuance of the title deeds to the beneficiaries under the National Titling Program. The survey has been done by the Nairobi City County government and is in the process of quality control. The Ministry of Lands and Physical Planning will proceed to issue titles once the Nairobi City government forwards the leases to the ministry. The implementation is ongoing, albeit at a very slow pace. Honorable Speaker, in its deliberations, the committee observed that lack of legal frameworks to guide government policies hampers efficient implementation and operations of policies. Also, inadequate budgetary allocation hinder implementation of House resolutions. Further, late and incomplete responses by ministry usually lead to back and forth communication with the committee, thus delaying reporting to the House. Additionally, most of the motions, legislations introduced in the House are not subjected to a thorough scrutiny on the viability of the implementation. This makes the House pass resolutions that are not in line with existing government agenda and midterm policies. Honorable Speaker, the committee also observed that the inordinate delay of occasioned by court cases is hampering the implementation of House resolutions, and consequently the committee is unable to conclusively report on the implementation of affected resolutions, especially under the Ministries of Land and Environment and Forests. Honorable Speaker, the committee... Honorable Speaker, the committee, after deliberations, made the following recommendations. That 1, clear legislation should be developed to implement various government policies. 2, the National Assembly should develop an online tracking tool for the implementation of House resolutions as a matter of priority for effective follow-up of implementation of House resolutions. 3, the National Assembly should enhance its scrutiny of laws, resolutions, and motions to ensure that resolutions passed are implementable. 4, the House, and by extension, committees should ensure all resolutions passed are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound to ensure they are implementable and for effective follow-up of the same. Honorable Speaker, sometimes resolutions are made that are actually meant to be directed to county governments, which are impossible to implement. There are also, when some members move motions, they urge the government to do things which is not enforceable. So, Honorable Speaker, we have done several reports, and I would like to urge the House Committee to, Business Committee, to really bring those ones to for debate in the House. I know there are many members who have been asking me about the implementation of their motions, their laws and everything. I'd like to advise them that we have already tabled several reports. Maybe they can look at them, scrutinize, and find out whether theirs are not there. If they are not there, then they can always come back to us. I know Honorable Wamalwa is one of them, and we are following up your matter. And I just want to request the members. that we need to work together as far as citizens are concerned. Please read the report. It is detailed. And if you have anything that you need us to follow up, we shall do so. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move and now request Honorable Osoti, who is my Vice Chair, to second this motion. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Who is seconding?
Honorable Osoti.
Yes, Honorable Osoti, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry I didn't carry my card today. Mr. Speaker, I beg to second the adoption of the report on the submission from stakeholders regarding the implementation status of legislation, petitions, and resolutions passed by the House as moved by my able chairperson, Honorable Ole Kenta. Mr. Speaker, I start by one, congratulating the committee for the good work they have done. Yes, I have to. Mr. Speaker, this is among the many reports that this committee has tabled, and I'm happy that now the House Business Committee allowed us to debate this particular motion that is actually an omnibus of 6 motions, 6 committee reports, and 19 petitions. As alluded to by my chair, we have also a series of other reports which we have tabled, and they have not been debated. But I want to encourage the House that I think the Committee of Implementation is a very important committee to this House, because it is a committee that reports back on the status of the issues that have been adopted by this House. So I think it will be very important to prioritize their debate so that members know that actually they are not legislating in vain. Mr. Speaker, this report was compiled after intensive scrutiny of written submission from government agencies, from various stakeholders, so many meetings with the ministries and stakeholders, scrutiny of records of evidence, and in some cases, visits to some of these places which are contained in the various reports that have been adopted by this House. But Mr. Speaker, I want to say that we, as a committee, we are facing a number of challenges. I think most of them have been alluded to by the chair. But one challenge, Mr. Speaker, is court cases. Court cases that arise in the middle of our examination of some report, and others arise immediately. Some reports are adopted by this House. And this really has impeded our work and slowed down some of the work that we do as a committee. And some of these court cases are unnecessary, and sometimes are a way of interfering with the parliamentary independence. Because this House, just like we don't deal with matters which are sub judice, I don't think it is proper for the courts to appear like they are injecting Parliament from carrying out its responsibility. And one case in point is the case of Mombasa Cement, which has been pending in the committee for almost a year now because of a flurry of cases that keep on coming. The other challenge is a challenge of quality of recommendation. Mr. Speaker, I think at one point the former leader of majority alluded to this fact, that we would need to retrain our clerks so that the recommendations that come out in those reports are recommendations that are specific and actionable. Sometimes it's very difficult for the Committee of Implementation to deal with the recommendations that are vague. Because if you give recommendation that is vague, you would expect to get a vague answer. And that has been one of the challenges. So moving forward, I would like to recommend that committees, through the clerks, focus on giving us recommendations that are actionable and specific and to the point. The other issue, Mr. Speaker, is notification from the clerk's office. You know, the standing order say that this committee can take up a matter 60 days after that matter has been adopted by this House. Mr. Speaker, we find ourselves engaging in a fishing expedition, looking for what to handle. I think what should happen is that 60 days after a matter has been dispensed by this House, the clerk's office needs to write to the committee and say, we have a particular question, was asked in the House, these were the responses, these were the undertaking, committee should deal with it. But in most cases, you find us looking for that ourselves. So I think we need a seamless process from the clerk's office to us. The other challenge is petitions from aggrieved parties. We make recommendations here, and then because one of the parties who has been adversely mentioned goes to court because he was not given a chance to be heard. That we have seen petitions in this House, some of it we have passed it, especially touching on the sugar report. We have
You just get 2 minutes now that you are seconding,
the issue of no responses, especially when we write to some ministries, asking on the issue of implementation of acts of parliament. We do not get answers from ministries because one of the roles of this committee is to follow up on the implementation status of acts of parliament. We have a series of various acts of parliament which have not been implemented. But we would need to work extra hard to get answers from ministries on why agencies or even ministries are not able to implement acts of parliament. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that this is a good report. We would strive to work more, especially on issues like budget, which we pass in this House. Pick and pack reports, which the chairman has agreed that that will be our next focus as a committee. The issue of questions, answers to questions which have undertakings in it. I think also this is one issue that has come up here severally, and we need support so that we can get these matters handled. For those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I second. Thank you.
Very well, honorable members. I would propose a question, which is that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Implementation on the status of implementation of registrations, petitions, and resolutions passed by the House, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, June 30th, 2020. Honorable Ole Sankok.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, the implementation of the policies and legislative that we pass in this House is very important. Honorable Speaker, so I stand to support Honorable Olekenda and his committee for the marvelous job that they have been doing. Honorable Speaker, I also have some legislative framework that are still pending, Honorable Speaker, but I'm sure they are up their game and they will be able to follow to the latter, that whatever that we have passed in this House is implemented. Honorable Speaker, so that the House does not act in vain. Honorable Speaker, with those very few remarks, I do support. Thank you.
Honorable Amalwa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of Implementation is a very important committee as far as this House is concerned. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Chair and the committee members. At least we've seen some light in this Committee of Implementation. Mr. Speaker, Parliament cannot legislate in vain. There are some bills, Mr. Speaker, that were passed in the last Parliament, and I'm happy the leader of majority is here. When I came in the last Parliament, Mr. Speaker, we sponsored a bill, and it's now an act, fertilizer board, because we know the importance of fertilizer in this country, Mr. Speaker. And up to now, we have no fertilizer board in place. I'm saying this so that they take note of this. It is supposed to come under the Ministry of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker. We know very well this is an agriculture country, and agriculture can only move when there is availability of fertilizer. And this is a big problem to our farmers, Mr. Speaker. Why is it that this bill, which was sent by His Excellency the President, around 2014, 2015, up to now, we do not have a fertilizer board. Mr. Speaker, there's also a motion that we passed here, Mr. Speaker, under the HEROES Act. The bill, there's a motion that was passed in the Senate, Mr. Speaker, that with devolution, we should have a public university in every county. Mr. Speaker, in line with that motion that was passed in the Senate, and in line with the HEROES Act, I brought a motion on the floor of this House, Mr. Speaker, to upgrade Kitale Technical College, Mr. Speaker, to be upgraded to become a university and to be renamed Wamala Kijana University of Science and Technology, Mr. Speaker. This issue was passed. The minister came on the floor of the House in the committee level, and the technical college was upgraded, Mr. Speaker, because of that motion, to become a national polytechnic. And it was on the final end of becoming a university, but we said as we wait for the upgrading to become a university, it should be renamed to Wamala Kijana University of Science and Technology. Up to now, it has not yet been renamed and it has not yet been upgraded. But however, we thank the ministry because it was upgraded from a technical to now a national polytechnic. Mr. Speaker, there's so much that goes on. Look at the issue of COVID-19 funds. Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of issues that were put across by His Excellency the President to cushion Kenyans. The Committee of Implementation, we expected you to bring a report and tell us about the issue of COVID. Like the funds, Mr. Speaker, that have been misappropriated in KEMSA. This is a very serious matter. And we expect this committee to prioritize its work, Mr. Speaker. We need these urgent reports, particularly on the COVID issue, because a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, has been misappropriated. The CEO has been suspended. We need you to summon the board so that you'll be able to understand, Mr. Speaker, so that we can understand the implementation status and the impact. This committee is a very powerful committee, Mr. Speaker. And you want them to be facilitated, Mr. Speaker, by the PSC, as is stipulated under Article 127. Parliament is here legislating, but we cannot be a laughing stock, Mr. Speaker. We want whatever is passed on the floor of this House to see it implemented. And it can only be done if this committee of implementation can be empowered. I really want to thank Honorable Kenta and Honorable Sosi. We can see some life in this committee, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed a very important committee that we must be able to support, and I'm also happy with the leader of majority. He's here, and you can see he has fitted in the shoes very well, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank Honorable Kimunya. He's on top of things. We are happy about this. They have picked up very well with Honorable Wangwe. You can see the leadership has moved on very well because they are committed, and we are here to support them because we are happy with the work that they are doing, you know. And as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, now that we've discussed about this issue of InfoTrack, it will also be nice, this Committee of Implementation, to move with speed and even summon those people because Parliament has exercised themselves. They've talked about this issue. So move quickly, summon them, because tomorrow we are going to see other pollsters coming up, Mr. Speaker, without clear parameters. And this is going to mess up the entire country. We know very well 2020 is not far. The BBI report, once it's come out, I've seen some people bring pollsters. And once you put mechanisms in place, Mr. Speaker, it's going to bring sanity. It's going to bring professionalism, Mr. Speaker. We support this, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you and I support.
Honorable Mutunga, member for Tigania West. And honorable members, just remind you, you have 5 minutes. At least maximum of 5 minutes so that you are able to organize your thoughts accordingly.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to this motion. Honorable Speaker, this is an important day for Kenya because a lot has gone on in terms of legislation and much has not been done. We do laws in this House and the laws are not implemented. Honorable Speaker, I would like to specifically touch on matters of agriculture. Honorable Speaker, in the year 2013, 2 laws were passed by this House. This is the AFA Act and the Crops Act. The Crops Act presupposed that there would be an amalgamation of the former boards into one, and that was done. Honorable Speaker, AFA was formed. AFA was formed without a board. To date, there is no board that should guide that particular institution. Right now, what we are doing is disengage or dismember AFA into individual boards. We have been discussing the law on, the bill on the sugar board. We have been discussing the tea board. We will soon be discussing the coffee board. We will then be discussing the horticultural board. We will also go back to discuss the oil and nuts. We will discuss the fibers and so on. And then the question is, if this House passed a law that presupposed that we should have a board called Agriculture and Food Authority, why did the ministry not put together a board that would guide that particular institution? Without a board, no decisions can be made. And an interim management committee was set up to make sure that this law was implemented. This law had a specific deadline upon which it would have become effective, whether they wanted it or not. Upon approaching that deadline, some hurried mechanisms were put in place. And then an interim management committee, which I happen to be a member, was set up. And the law was more or less implemented. But then the remaining part of the executive was not done. Appointment of the board, we even recruited a chairperson, which was part of the terms of reference. And this chairperson was not given the job. Agriculture sector is more or less stalled because nothing happens in as far as these bonds are concerned. The entire bonds were collapsed into subdirectorates or directorates under the AFA, and these directorates are still interim. The CEO of AFA is interim. All the members of staff are interim. Everybody is interim. Interim people don't make serious decisions. And this is a serious matter that needs to be looked into. So as the Committee on Implementation of Legislations takes up effect, as they seek to be supported so that they may be able to do their job very well, Honorable Speaker, I seek the support of this House for this committee to do its work, because we cannot be having laws that are not implemented. There is a lot of hue and cry in the sector saying that the AFA as an institution is not performing. But it is not AFA as an institution which has failed to perform, it's because the institution is not supported effectively. If you have no board, how do you perform? Now we are going to disengage and form very many other boards. The question is, how many boards shall we form? The crops in this country, or the commodities grown in this country, are very many. We cannot have as many boards as there are commodities. That would be quite irrelevant and quite costly. So as a nation and as a country, we should focus on implementing these laws so that we can be able to have a form or a frame that can be followed for purposes of having good, yielding results from the work that we do. That's not the only law that has not been implemented. Many others have come up, and they are even being repealed before they can be implemented. And that is the work of this committee. Having said that, Honourable Speaker, I do support that this committee is given the relevant or requisite support that they need so that they can be effective. And the effectiveness of this committee needs to be checked in view of how are we rolling out implementation of the laws or the acts that we pass in this House. And we should be having, Honourable Speaker, we should demand for a report, a regular report, maybe on quarterly basis, to show the extent to which we are implementing the laws that we pass in this particular House. Honourable Speaker, I do support. Thank you.
Honourable Odiabo Akoth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to support. And Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the committee for a good work that they've done. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the challenge we face as a House is to make sure that we put punitive measures for different ministries that are not implementing the work of this House. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to serve in the 10th Parliament. Maybe because of the way Parliament was configured, it was easier to hold the cabinet secretaries accountable. Members would refuse to engage with their own issues on the floor when they don't act. But when we just speak here and ministries are not responding to what we are dealing with, then it's actually making our work as members very futile. Mr. Speaker, just before you called me, I was actually reading a comment that somebody is mentioning in relation to Rwanda. And they are saying that in Rwanda, during this COVID period, they have built 22,000 schools, while in Kenya, instead, we are having COVID millionaires. And Mr. Speaker, it's not because we have not appropriated money for classrooms. The money has been appropriated. I know as we sit in budget, we have said we are going to actually call the respective ministries so that we get an update. But sometimes, even our bureaucracy is too much that you might find that the COVID is over and the monies that were appropriated for specific purposes no longer make sense. So what we need is for this committee to work very closely with the relevant committees that are oversighting specific departments, just to make sure that the things that Parliament does actually takes effect. I was even shocked, Mr. Speaker, recently to see that there's a bill we worked on very, very closely with the late Honorable Joyce Laboso, the social security or social safety bill, that seeks to actually cushion a lot of the vulnerable women who are poor, children, during these times. In fact, a lot of it also has to do with Honorable Professor Jacqueline Oduolu was talking about. But unfortunately, we are actually now bringing the bill to repeal it before it's even implemented. Now, what sense does that make, honestly? At least even when we want to repeal something, let it go through even a process of implementation for 1 month, even 2 months. But this bill has never been operationalized, so we don't know how good or bad it is, and we are not even giving any alternatives, but we're already seeking to repeal it. So, Mr. Speaker, what I would suggest is that as Parliament, we need to find a way to have teeth with which to bite so that we are taken seriously, so that we are not like a rubber stamp for the executive. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I do support and yet again congratulate the committee. Thank you.
Honorable Majority Leader.
Honorable Speaker, I rise to support the report on the Committee on Implementation on the status of the various legislation, motions, petitions, and resolutions, and to say I'm happy that at last we were able to slot them in, because they were being bashed that they are not working, but we were probably guilty at the House business that we were not giving you the time, and now at least you have updated members. The sad thing is that the members being updated are not here. And tomorrow they'll be asking us the same thing, what is the status of my bill? And I'm not even sure how many of them will have read this report. But so that's how life is. When people have it, they don't want it. When they don't have it, they ask for it. I also commend the committee for work they've done. And just going to some of the findings that they have come up with, I think one of the things that they observe is this, they call the lack of legal frameworks to guide government policies, which they believe hampers the efficient implementation and operations of policies. Now, I'll leave the issue of budgetary allocations, because we in this House are the ones who actually do the budgetary allocations, and I know it will always be a standard excuse that we did not have money to implement the policies, but that should be factored in at least in the next year, when ministries or the MDS should be coming and saying, we need so much money to implement certain things. So that lack of money should perhaps not be an excuse given to the committees, because ministries have a choice, have a chance every year to prioritize what they need. And if something is worth implementing, they should prioritize it in the budget. But looking through the bit about the late and incomplete responses, I know this is a standard thing. Committees will rush to do a report here. And by the time they do a report, the ministry then comes back later to give. And I've been seeing even this, even when on some of the bills that are in the process. The ministries will give a set of amendments. When the committee has finished, they bring another set, or like on the miscellaneous, which was published, then the ministry started coming back and saying, we don't want this published, we don't want this published, until I said, why did you bring it in the first place? So there's that disconnect between what happens. But the long and short of it all is perhaps to just ask, the one thing that we can control is these legal frameworks. And I would like to urge the chair and this committee perhaps to identify which are these key legislation that we need to amend to create those missing frameworks. Because I've always said that our work as an oversight, our work as Parliament, is not to recommend that DCI takes action. He was going to do it anyway, right? Is to identify where are the loopholes, where are the legal loopholes that we need to seal so that a mistake is not repeated in future. That is the work we have as members of parliament. So in all these things, the individual committees have come up with the resolutions. Now, the Committee on Implementation is in a unique situation of looking at it from a bird's eye view and identifying some commonality in the weaknesses that is forcing things not to be implemented. So you can identify which is this overarching law that we need to amend so that we force implementation and we don't say that because there's lack of a proper legal framework, it's impeding on implementation. I think the other thing that the committee has identified, and I agree with them, is on this issue of the motions and legislations, again, not being in tandem with some of the government policies, and hence, when the two of them are at cross purposes, it's the ministry will always go and say, we cannot implement this because it's against our policy. And again, I want to urge the committee to simultaneously look at that and say, how do we capture that upfront? I'll look at it later because I think one of the other things the committee also said is that we find some of these resolutions and motions being unimplementable. Now, since we all sit here when the motions are being drafted and the recommendations coming, perhaps it's a challenge I would want to throw to the committee that before the House pronounces itself, that members of the committee should perhaps act as a quality control committee, that they can look at these recommendations that are being brought to the floor of the House and decide that this is not going to be implementable. So bring in an amendment to ensure that we don't end up making the committee do a lot of work for something that is not implementable, or giving hope to the Kenyans that the House has passed, that the following shall be done, only knowing it's not implementable. That perhaps we should now work in as one new House and have the Committee of Implementation not just waiting for reports to report on the implementability or the status of the implementation, but to proactively intervene at the point of a report being tabled in this House and almost tell the chair that this report cannot be done. And that could be done, Honorable Speaker, with perhaps some more technical expertise at the secretariat level, that we almost have, in fact, I would have thought the committee would be recommending, apart from just clerks being trained, that we have a quality control component that will be looking at the quality of the report before it comes here. Is it implementable? So that we don't be seen to be legislating in vain. Because it's so unfortunate if we come up with a resolution here and then we say this could not be implemented because it's not implementable. And I like the fact that you flagged some of those things, and with some solid examples, we could then use them as part of learning and developing the necessary capacity to judge what is implementable and what is not. Not necessarily for us, but even for those who come after this House, to be able to see that this is the quality of our resolution that can be implemented. Below this, if it goes below that threshold, the committee will be told, we will not accept that report on the floor of the House unless you amend, it's thrown away by the House, because otherwise we'll be wasting one another's time. I'm also happy that in terms of, I would also want to recommend the chair that pick up some of those things, and we can give you some time within the framework of the liaison committee so that you're able to share some of those examples with the chairs, or when we have the next leadership meeting, so that, because we may be blaming the clerks, that the clerks are not doing the reports in a certain way. But it's not the clerks who move these reports in this House. It's not the clerks who sign. It's the committee and the chairs. And we want to build the capacity at the chair level, at the committee level, so that they own that report and don't come and say, it is our clerk who drafted it in a certain way. I mean, clerks will give you a draft, but what you do with it is up to the committee. And I think that's what perhaps we might share within the liaison and within the leadership meetings. What are some of the issues you've picked up on some of those reports that are not good, reports that are disharmonious with the government policies, reports that should never have seen the light of day of the House, so that we can use that as part of our learning process and make it better into the future. So once again, I want to thank the committee and commend and encourage you to plow through all the other reports. At least you put to rest a batch of reports, and so many of them. Let members know the others, so they stop asking for what happened to my report. And hopefully also that the members will be here next time when you're doing this report, so that they don't keep asking when you've already done the work. Thank you, and congratulations once again.
Shall have Honorable Yeah.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I would like to say at the offset that, and I want to congratulate the Chair, one, for his dedication to work as Chair of the implementation, and the Vice Chair and the team that we work with. I think we have a very robust, very good team that really wants to ensure that Parliament succeeds. The work of this Parliament going forward actually rises or falls on this committee. If this committee does not do its work, then Parliament work might be in vain. But because this committee is there, it's possible to ensure that we, as a Parliament, we enforce the decisions of this committee, because essentially this is why this committee is here. That when Parliament passes resolutions, within 60 days, this committee should be able to check on whether those decisions have been implemented. But I think the story behind the story that is there currently is that 60 days go, 90 days, 100 until a session of Parliament ends. But a lot of the things that we pass in this House are not implemented. And every time here when we bring a motion in this Parliament, there'll be one or two members who will say that, you see, we discuss these motions and pass them here, but nothing happens. And that's a statement that indicates Parliament's work, that we are unable to enforce or ensure that what we have said in this House is implemented by the executive. A lot of the work that is done here is not implemented. And if you look at this report, that comprehensive report that my chairman has given, it actually tells you that a lot of the things that have been discussed in this Parliament, especially in terms of motions and petitions, have not been implemented. And one of the things that I would like to suggest going forward, that this Parliament needs to have an act on the Committee of Implementation that gives power to ensure that it can enforce the things that this House passes. Otherwise, without an act of Parliament, without proper structuring of the standing orders, people will ignore what Parliament does. And the power. If we had an opportunity with the chair to visit Zambia. In Zambia, they have a committee of government assurances, that every assurance that government gives in the House is immediately followed. And it leads even to impeachment motions. It leads even to dismissal of executive or ministers, because they take the work of the government assurance very, very seriously. And the Committee of Government Assurances can actually draft an impeachment motion based on the findings that they have and send a minister packing. But what we have here is a whole act of Parliament, like Honorable Millie has said, act of Parliament is passed here, is taken there, it's not implemented. The one that we've been told by Chris Wamalo on fertilizer, it has been passed, it has never been done. I did 2 motions in this House on cashew nuts and coconut, 2 motions. They were passed here. But every time I talk to the minister, why don't you do this? He said, no, this is not a priority. This is not what we want to do. But Parliament had passed a motion on the same. And there's a lot of these things that happen. So what I would like to say, and thank God we have a leader of majority here that listens and is here. And I want to urge you, as we pass these motions and these acts of Parliament and the petitions as reports are tabled here, what we would like to do is that you create a tracking system, that this thing has gone beyond 60 days. It has not been done. Kindly, as clerk's office, inform the Committee of Implementation. What happens, a lot of the work that we have is where members have come to complain that this thing was passed but has never done. But we do not have a proper mechanism where what is passed in this parliament, after 60 days, it automatically falls on the lap of the Committee of Implementation so that immediately the committee takes it up and tries to implement it or pushes for implementation. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say this. The Committee of Implementation where I sit, we have had issues where you call ministers to come and explain certain things, but they feel that they're not responsible to Parliament on the implementation. They think they're only responsible to the President. They cannot come to the Committee of Implementation. You see, the Committee of Implementation, there are only 3 committees that are manned by minority. The PIC, the PAC, and Committee of Implementation. That's how powerful that is. An oversight committee on behalf of Parliament. And that's a very important thing. But what we see is that people and cabinet secretaries and in government do not see that this committee needs to do the work that it's supposed to do. So, Leader Majority, I will urge you that you liaise with us closely. But lastly, I would also like to say, this is a committee of the minority. The minority leadership should have been here. Should have been here. But today I take over the role of leader of minority in this house.
You can have. You can have because I was set a president. Let's have Honorable Mutua Balasa. Honorable Mutua Balasa took leave. Honorable Justice Kizito.
I want to say that this is a very important committee, and I want to support my colleagues who are saying that this is a very important committee, and whatever we pass in this particular house must be implemented to the latter. And therefore, I would like to ask, even us as chairman of the committees, I think it should be, take it upon us also to keep on following up on also what's supposed to have been passed in our committee so that we can see them implemented. And I want to think that this is a house of representatives. We represent Kenyans. And at the same time, it's the house that deals with everything that goes with money bills, appropriation bills, and even giving authority to incur expenses, that kind of, and even the budget itself. This house has been given a responsibility of dealing with the matter corruption through its 3 very important committees. That is special funds, that deals with all the funds in this country. We also have public accounts committee that deals with the mainstream fund, the mainstream expenditures and accounts. And also we have a public investment committee. This one deals with the parastatals and corporation monies and government investments. More often than not, these committees have done very good recommendations on matter craft. And the parliament is another arm that is supposed to participate in craft, dealing with the anti-craft arm that is supposed to help these other arms of the government that deal with the craft. But more often than not, I have seen very good recommendation, and especially from PAC, PIC, and special funds. But then I've never seen the DCI of this nation following it up and picking this and using it actually to prosecute, to investigate, prosecute, and actually convict those people who participate in craft and criminal of such activities of that kind of nature. But we have seen a lot of dramas out there, and I can say, Mr. Speaker, this is why it's not easy for this government to convict a single person who has done corruption. I can remember there are quite a number of people who have been there in these offices, and we have never seen them actually prosecuting anybody. It's because they leave Parliament out. Whatever we pass here, they don't take. And you want just to do drama, running up and down, getting people to court. At the end of the day, you have no evidence. But we have a lot of evidence here that can be used if the Committee of Implementation can be followed up, and we follow on our recommendations. It's very possible that we can be able to cut down on this, because the Parliament as an arm of the government, an arm of one of the government, actually has been laid down. I remember me and Kimunya here and others, and I think it's another colleague of mine here, and Mheshimiwa Gaju Ng'anyi and others, I think we're in the 10th Parliament, and that's the time the government used to sit in the House. Government used to sit in the House, and we used to have ministers here and everybody else. So anytime there was that kind of motions, they were taken very seriously and they were followed. So I tend to think that the Committee of Implementation, we want to support you, and we want to give you the tools and impetus to make sure you pursue whenever these recommendations are done that are implementable or are actionable. Please summon these people and let them tell us how they are going to deal with the matters or with the recommendations that have been made by this House, because this House belongs to the people. This House belongs to the people, and it's the people who gave us the mandate to be here and to speak on their behalf. Therefore, whatever that goes through this House must be implemented so that Kenyans can get value for their money. And I want to say it's very important that this committee also has to be tough, and periodically we need to be getting these reports on how they have gone and whatever, so that we also follow up on this as Parliament, as we support this committee, very important committee, very dignified committee indeed, so that it can be able to implement whatever we have passed in this House, because at the end of the day, things don't work. We have seen so many people in acting position in this country, and committees have been talking this year again and again, and I can give an example of a CEO of a national CDF committee who acted for almost over 10 years, and the recommendations were done again and again and again and again. Nothing was going on. So I tend to think that the executive must take this House very seriously, because if you don't take this House seriously as an executive or an accounting officer of this nation, I know it can easily pull you down, because you are not working and you are not working for the people. And that's why I want to support BBI, to say that when BBI comes, I think the government must come back to this House so that we can be able.
Honorable Nganya Chachu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to support this motion of our committee in implementation. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a very important committee. Mr. Speaker, sir, this committee is actually fairly new. It only started in the 11th Parliament, and of course now on the 12th Parliament. This is because in those years, Mr. Speaker, sir, we were able to have the ministers on the floor of the House, this is the 10th Parliament, and we were able to get commitment from the ministers on the floor. And we had sanctions for them if they don't fulfill or go through with their commitment. But under this pressure system of government, we don't have ministers here. We can only ensure that whatever laws and motions we have passed in this House can be fully pursued and commitments made is only through such a committee. Mr. Speaker, sir, then it was actually private members' motions and private members' bills that were actually passed here, and we make the solutions as a House